Someone is deeply in love with you, and the reason behind it may unsettle you far more than it flatters you. What is happening has very little to do with the person you believe yourself to be. Instead, it has everything to do with something you awakened inside them without even realizing it. Once you understand this, it becomes difficult to look at the situation the same way again. Most people grow up believing that love is built on attraction, shared interests, good timing, and mutual understanding. Those ideas sound comforting. They make relationships feel predictable and safe. But sometimes, the strongest emotional attachments are created in places that logic cannot reach. The truth is that powerful love, the kind that feels consuming and impossible to ignore, often begins beneath conscious awareness. It starts in the hidden corners of the mind. It grows in places people rarely examine, and somehow, through nothing more than your presence, you stepped into one of those hidden places inside them. You did not simply make them happy. You did not merely make them smile. You made them feel recognized. You made them feel understood in a way that frightened them. That is where everything changed. When a person feels truly seen at that level, something powerful can happen. They do not just admire the person in front of them. They become emotionally attached to what that person awakens within them. Most people never realize this distinction. They assume being loved means being appreciated. But what is happening here goes much deeper. You triggered recognition. Not recognition of your appearance, not recognition of your achievements, not even recognition of your personality. You awakened recognition of something buried deep inside them. Something they had ignored, something they had hidden, something they had spent years avoiding. Without trying, you became a mirror. You did not plan it. You did not force it. You were simply yourself. Yet somehow that was enough. You appeared in a way they did not expect. You behaved in ways they could not predict. You represented something they could not easily explain. And because they could not explain it, their usual defenses began to weaken. For years, their mind had been protecting them from uncomfortable truths, protecting them from desires they did not want to acknowledge, protecting them from emotional needs they believed should remain hidden. The walls seemed strong, the structure seemed permanent. Then you appeared, and suddenly those walls started to crack. This is where things become complicated. What they feel for you is not simple. It is not neat. It is not fully understood even by them. Their feelings are made from longing, fear, hope, confusion, and projection all mixed together. Part of them wants to move closer. Part of them wants to run away. Part of them believes you are the answer to something important. Another part fears what that answer might reveal. You did not just attract them, you disrupted them. And when something disrupts the unconscious mind, it can feel like destiny. That feeling can be overwhelming. It can make ordinary encounters seem significant. It can make simple conversations feel meaningful. It can make small moments stay in memory for years. The interesting part is that you probably did not do anything dramatic. You did not deliver the perfect speech. You did not perform some grand gesture. You did not follow a special formula. You simply violated an expectation. And the human mind reacts strongly to that. People become comfortable with patterns. They learn what to expect. They learn how to predict outcomes. Then someone arrives who does not fit the pattern. Someone who cannot be easily categorized. Someone who creates uncertainty. That uncertainty captures attention. You became unpredictable in a way that felt meaningful. Not chaotic, not confusing, meaningful. As if your presence represented something larger than yourself. That was the moment the projection began. Slowly, almost without realizing it, they started seeing more than just you. They started seeing possibilities. They started seeing answers. They started seeing solutions to emotional questions they had never consciously asked. You became connected to a void they could never properly name. a missing piece they never fully understood. And once that happens, something changes. People no longer simply fall in love with a person. They fall into an experience. They fall into an idea. They fall into a feeling. And escaping that feeling becomes extremely difficult, because letting go of you would require confronting the part of themselves that you awakened. The mind resists that confrontation. It resists it with surprising force. So instead, they hold on, even when it confuses them, even when it frustrates them, even when it hurts, even when it makes no logical sense. There is another truth hidden beneath all of this. You did not only awaken something beautiful, you also awakened something unstable. When buried emotions rise to the surface, they rarely arrive in a calm and orderly way. They rush upward. They demand attention. They reshape perception. They blur emotional boundaries. Suddenly, everything feels more intense. Every interaction seems important. Every absence feels noticeable. Every small sign feels loaded with meaning. And emotional intensity can easily be mistaken for certainty. That is why you may notice something unusual in the way they look at you. A lingering attention, a subtle tension, a feeling that something unspoken exists beneath the surface. You sense it, even when no words are exchanged, even when nothing obvious happens. Something feels different. The reason is simple. The conflict is happening beneath conscious awareness. It is occurring in the deeper layers of the mind where logic does not always rule. In that space, contradictory emotions can exist side by side. Love and fear, hope and doubt, desire and resistance, all at the same time. This is why their behavior sometimes appears inconsistent. One day they seem drawn toward you. The next day they seem distant. One moment they appear open. The next moment they retreat. It may look confusing from the outside, but internally it makes perfect sense. Their feelings have not disappeared. Their defenses have activated. A part of them is warning that getting closer means facing something they are not ready to face. So an unconscious cycle begins. They move closer, then they pull away. They feel desire, then fear. They feel certainty, then confusion, again and again. The pattern repeats, and whether you realize it or not, you may feel the energy of that cycle too. You may notice that this connection feels heavier than others, more emotionally charged, more difficult to define, almost as though it is pulling hidden emotions out of both people involved. That leads to an important question. What exactly triggered all of this? Why did this happen? Why you? The answer is that it was never random. Somewhere along the way, there was a moment when something shifted inside them, a specific moment. Maybe they cannot even identify it clearly. Maybe they do not remember exactly when it happened. But it happened. Something inside them recognized something inside you, and once that recognition occurred, there was no easy way back. The recognition was never about surface qualities. It was never about appearances alone. It was about meaning. It was about symbolism. It was about what your presence represented inside their unconscious world. You became connected to something they had been searching for, something they had been avoiding, something they desperately needed, all at the same time. Until they understand that connection, they will struggle to understand their own feelings. That is why they cannot easily let go. That is why the connection feels so intense. That is why it feels impossible to explain. Because what was awakened did not begin yesterday. It has been sleeping inside them for years, waiting, growing quietly, gathering strength in the background. And once something like that wakes up, it rarely returns to sleep. It demands attention. It seeks resolution. Eventually, it forces a confrontation. The question is not whether that confrontation will happen. The question is how they will respond when it does. For a long time, they tried to convince themselves it was temporary, just a passing fascination, just a brief emotional reaction, just another feeling that would fade with time. But time did not weaken it. Time strengthened it. Because this attachment is connected to something older and deeper than attraction. The unconscious mind never truly forgets unresolved emotions. It stores them. It preserves them. It waits patiently. And when the right trigger appears, everything returns to awareness. That trigger became you. Not because you intended it, not because you planned it, but because something about you unlocked a door they had spent years keeping closed. Now the emotions behind that door are impossible to ignore. They try to maintain control. They try to appear normal. They try to convince themselves that everything is manageable. Yet beneath the surface, the process continues. Quietly. Relentlessly. Most people imagine obsession as dramatic behavior. Constant messages, public displays, extreme actions. But the deepest forms of obsession often look completely different. They hide behind silence. They hide behind restraint. They hide behind self-control. The stronger the feeling becomes, the harder the person may work to conceal it. Unfortunately, suppression rarely eliminates emotion. More often, it strengthens it. The more they try not to think about you, the more often you enter their thoughts. The more they try to move on, the more they replay memories. Conversations repeat in their mind. Small details become important. Moments that seemed insignificant gain emotional weight. Not because they want this to happen, because they cannot stop it. You have become linked to something unresolved, something unfinished. And unfinished emotional patterns are incredibly powerful. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is this. The intensity is not entirely about you. It is about what you represent. Human beings often fall in love with symbols as much as people. And somehow, you became a symbol. A symbol of something they lost. A symbol of something they never received. A symbol of something they secretly believed they did not deserve. That is why their feelings can feel overwhelming, because loving you forces them to confront a painful contradiction inside themselves. Part of them wants connection. Part of them fears it. Part of them wants to move closer. Part of them wants to protect itself. And that conflict does not remain hidden forever. Eventually it spills outward. Eventually it affects choices. Eventually it demands to be acknowledged. Whether they face it directly or continue running from it remains uncertain. But one thing is clear. The emotions they feel are far deeper than they appear on the surface. And the reason they cannot easily forget you is not because you entered their life. It is because you awakened a part of them that had been asleep for far too long. Now that part is awake. Now it is asking questions. Now it wants answers. And until those answers are found, your presence will remain impossible for them to ignore. It shows up in the smallest moments. It reveals itself through hesitation, through mixed signals, through those confusing periods when they seem incredibly close to you one day, only to become distant the next without any clear explanation. And you feel it. You feel the inconsistency. You feel the emotional swings. You feel that strange sensation that something inside them is pulling them toward you, while another force is pushing them away at exactly the same time. But the truth is deeper than most people realize. They are not confused about you. What overwhelms them is what is happening inside themselves. You have awakened something they can no longer easily ignore. You have touched a part of them that does not operate through logic, planning, or careful reasoning. It operates through emotion. It operates through memory. It operates through desire that has been buried for far too long. And once that hidden part wakes up, it begins asking questions they never expected to face. Why does this person feel so familiar? Why does this connection affect me so deeply? Why am I drawn toward this when part of me wants to run away from it? Why does this feel important? Why does it feel bigger than something ordinary? These questions begin moving beneath the surface of their awareness. They do not always recognize what is happening. They do not always understand the source of their emotions. But they feel the pressure. And that pressure slowly begins creating conflict inside them. Not dramatic conflict, not something obvious to the outside world. Most people would never notice it. But internally, something starts dividing their attention. Their conscious mind wants certainty. It wants predictability. It wants stability. But the deeper parts of the psyche want something entirely different. Those deeper parts want resolution. They want healing. They want completion. And unfortunately, resolution rarely arrives in a comfortable way. Very often it arrives through disruption. Very often it arrives through discomfort. Very often it arrives through change. That is why they begin creating distance. Not because they want to lose you, not because they stopped caring, not because the connection disappeared. They create distance because they believe distance will help them regain control. They tell themselves that stepping back will calm their emotions. They tell themselves that time will weaken the attachment. They tell themselves that space will make everything easier to understand. But what they discover is something very different. Distance does not erase unconscious attachment. In many cases, it strengthens it, because when someone is absent, reality begins to fade. And when reality fades, imagination begins to take over. The mind starts filling in the empty spaces. It starts replaying memories. It starts creating possibilities. It starts revisiting moments over and over again. And imagination has a way of making emotions feel even larger. Now you are no longer simply a person in their life. You become an idea. You become a symbol. You become a reflection of everything they cannot fully understand about themselves. And symbols are powerful. They do not remain fixed. They grow. They evolve. They become increasingly meaningful. The more they think about you, the more significance they attach to the connection. The more significance they attach to the connection, the harder it becomes to let go of it. Eventually, they are no longer attached only to who you are. They become attached to what you represent. And what you represent cannot easily be replaced. That is where things become even more intense. Because despite all these feelings, they do not fully trust them. They do not trust how powerful the emotions are. They do not trust how quickly the connection affected them. They do not trust how deeply it reaches into their thoughts. Anything that powerful feels dangerous. Anything that powerful feels like it must come with a cost. So their mind creates resistance. Not because it wants to destroy the feeling, because it wants to protect them from what the feeling may require. Because accepting what they feel would force them to confront things they have avoided for years. Old desires, old disappointments, old wounds, old fears, hidden truths they have spent a long time keeping out of sight. And the human mind rarely rushes toward that kind of confrontation. It usually resists. It delays. It searches for distractions. It searches for explanations. It searches for ways to avoid what feels uncomfortable. That is why they remain trapped in the middle. They want you, but they resist you. They think about you, but they avoid acting on those thoughts. They feel everything, yet they express very little. And this creates a tension that never truly disappears. It stays beneath the surface, quiet, persistent, growing little by little, day after day, moment after moment, until eventually something has to change, because no one can hold that level of contradiction forever. The psyche is not built to carry opposing forces endlessly. Sooner or later, something reaches its limit. And when that limit arrives, something breaks. But it does not always break in predictable ways. Sometimes people confess what they have been hiding. Sometimes they disappear. Sometimes they act in ways that surprise even themselves. Sometimes they make choices that seem irrational from the outside, because when emotions reach a certain intensity, logic no longer remains in control. Emotion becomes the dominant force. And that is the moment when everything begins to shift. The moment when pretending becomes impossible. The moment when denial starts losing its power. The moment when they are forced to face what this connection truly means to them, whether they feel prepared or not. Because what was awakened inside them is not temporary. It is not superficial. It is not something that disappears simply because they wish it would. It demands attention. It demands acknowledgement. And eventually, it demands resolution. The only question is how much they are willing to sacrifice to avoid facing it. Because avoidance has limits. Suppression has limits. Distraction has limits. And what they feel has already pushed beyond those limits. You can sense it in the silence. You can sense it in the pauses. You can sense it in the energy that remains between interactions, even when no words are spoken. That tension does not vanish. It waits. It lingers. It continues building beneath the surface. And what is happening inside them is no longer stable. It is becoming pressure. And pressure always seeks a release. But release does not always arrive as clarity. Sometimes it arrives as collapse. Sometimes it arrives as a moment where everything they have been holding together suddenly becomes impossible to maintain. Because this is no longer simple attraction. This is no longer curiosity. This is confrontation. A confrontation with parts of themselves they have spent years avoiding. Parts shaped by old pain. Parts shaped by rejection. Parts shaped by beliefs that told them they were not enough. Beliefs that told them they were too much. Beliefs that convinced them love was unsafe. Then you appeared, and without even trying, you challenged those beliefs. You contradicted the story they had been telling themselves. And that creates a problem. Because the psyche does not easily accept contradiction. It fights it. It resists it. It tries to protect the familiar story, even when that story causes pain. Accepting you would require accepting a different version of themselves, a version that is more open, a version that is more vulnerable, a version that is willing to believe something better is possible. And that transformation feels frightening, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar.